The history of Ethiopia is a long and storied one. But today we are going to focus on the history of the Ethiopian Empire from its origins to the end of the Solomonic Dynasty. Ethiopia has a long history of foreign invaders trying to conquer it, and many succeeded for some time. But the country was able to produce its own indigenous empire in the 2nd century AD with the Kingdom of Axum. This kingdom lasted for nearly 1,000 years before Islam would cause its decline. The empire would be broken into smaller successor states, but they would later reunite in the 13th century under the Solomonic Dynasty. By the 16th century, the Ethiopian Empire covered much of modern-day Ethiopia and Eritrea and parts of Somalia and Sudan. They were also one of the only African empires to never be colonized by a European power. But how did the Ethiopian Empire come to be? The Kingdom of Axum ruled over much of the Horn of Africa from the 2nd to the 9th century AD. Very little is known about the kingdom because the people didn't keep written records, and most of their buildings were made from perishable materials. Our knowledge of the Axumite Empire comes from accounts by outsiders, and although they weren't very complimentary, it's still our best source of information. According to an Arab writer named al-Idrisi who wrote in the 12th century, the kingdom was located at the end of the land of darkness where the sun could be seen during the day and night. He described the people of Axum as being white with curly hair, just like the people of Europe. The Kingdom of Axum was both a trading partner and rival of the Egyptian kingdoms to the east. For hundreds of years, they traded extensively with Egypt and other Mediterranean powers. In fact, the Queen of Sheba mentioned in the Bible and the Quran was most likely a queen of Axum. The Kingdom of Axum converted to Christianity in the 4th century AD, which may have been the result of the influence of the Roman Empire. This conversion ensured that the Kingdom of Axum was on good terms with the Christian kingdoms of Europe for centuries. By the 7th century, the Kingdom of Axum had taken control of the important trading city of Adulis, which allowed them to monopolize trade in the region. This wealth fueled the growth of Christianity in the kingdom and allowed them to construct monumental churches. The largest church was the Church of St. Mary of Zion, which contains the original Ark of the Covenant. The Church of St. Mary of Zion can be found in the modern-day city of Axum, and even today, the Ark of the Covenant is kept here and guarded by monks. The Kingdom of Axum controlled most of modern-day Ethiopia and Eritrea and parts of Sudan and Yemen. At its peak, the kingdom stretched from the Red Sea coast to the Indian Ocean and included all of modern-day Eritrea and most of northern Ethiopia. The kingdom was divided into provinces ruled over by local nobles. The king was considered the servant of the two-horned King of Kings, but really he was more of a god than an actual king. The king's court was located in the city of Axum, which is still the capital of Ethiopia today. The Kingdom of Axum lasted for almost 1,000 years, but by the 9th century, the Muslim Arab powers of the Middle East began to encroach upon their territory. Axum had no navy to speak of, so their coastal cities were vulnerable to attack. Soon after, Muslim forces would take over the coast and conquer the kingdom. Axum would continue on as a Christian kingdom in the highlands of Ethiopia, but without their control over the coast, they were no longer the regional power. Instead, the Zagwe dynasty took over the lowlands and the Solomonic dynasty continued to rule over the mountainous north. For the next 3 centuries, the Solomonic and Zagwe dynasties fought over control of the Ethiopian highlands. The Solomonic dynasty claimed descent from King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, while the Zage dynasty claimed descent from the ancient Kingdom of Axum. Eventually, the Zagwe dynasty conquered most of the Ethiopian highlands, but they wouldn't last for long. In the 13th century, a man named Yakuno Amlak would start a revolt against the Zagwe dynasty. Yakuno Amlak was able to take back much of the north for the Solomonic dynasty, and this victory marked the beginning of the Ethiopian Empire. The new empire was built around the old Kingdom of Axum and the Kingdom of Lasta, which was located in the Tigray region of Ethiopia. Yekuno Amlak's successors would go on to conquer much of the rest of Ethiopia and establish their capital in the city of Addis Ababa. The Zagwe dynasty fled south and established their own small kingdom, but soon the Solomonic rulers would conquer them as well. The Solomonic Dynasty would go on to rule over Ethiopia for nearly 600 years until Italy would occupy the country in the 20th century. The first ruler of the Ethiopian Empire was Yekuno Amlak, who was crowned in the city of Axum. Yekuno Amlak re-established the old capital of Axum, but he would move it south to the city of Debre Birhan in his son's reign. Debre Birhan would serve as the new capital of the Ethiopian Empire, and the royal court would remain here for several generations. During the reign of Yekuno Amlak's grandson, the empire expanded into the Ogaden region of Somalia and the Nuba Mountains of Sudan. But these would only be temporary occupations. The empire reached its greatest extent under the reign of Zara Yaqub, who conquered the Ghana and Afar regions. Zara Yaqub would also build a new capital city called Gondar, which would become the new imperial capital in the 17th century. Most of the Solomonic dynasty rulers were content to simply maintain the empire rather than expand it. The empire grew slowly but steadily during this time. The majority of the population remained rural, and the economy was based on agriculture. Trade was also important to the empire as merchants from India and Arabia passed through on their way to the Mediterranean. The Ethiopian Empire became the center of Ethiopian culture and learning. The Ge'ez language, which is related to ancient Arabic, became the liturgical language of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. Most people in the empire spoke one of the Afro-Asiatic languages, but the elites spoke Ge'ez among themselves. During the reign of Emperor Fasilides, the Ethiopian Empire began to change. Fasilides was the first emperor to convert to Ethiopian Orthodox Christianity, which caused him to be excommunicated by the head of the church. This started a rift between the church and the monarchy that would last for centuries. Fasilides was also responsible for building the town of Gondar and making it the new imperial capital. Gondar was a walled city with European-style architecture, including churches with pointed roofs. The town also featured large palaces for the nobility. The 17th century saw the arrival of Portuguese missionaries who had come to convert the Ethiopians to Christianity. However, the missionaries were mostly rejected, and those that did convert were often persecuted by the Orthodox Church. The Portuguese did, however, leave behind a lasting legacy in the form of their architecture and the fortifications they built around Gondar. The 18th century brought about the decline of the Solomonic Dynasty. Internal rebellions and external invasions weakened the empire and eventually led to its collapse. The Solomonic dynasty would continue on until the Italian occupation of Ethiopia in the 20th century. But the true golden age of the Ethiopian Empire had come to an end. A succession crisis in 1755 led to civil war between the various princes of Ethiopia. The war ended with the deposition of the last Solomonic emperor and the establishment of a new dynasty. This ushered in a period of peace and stability, but it also marked the end of the Ethiopian Empire. The Ethiopian Empire left a rich legacy behind. Their monumental churches are still standing, and their cultural influence can be seen throughout the Horn of Africa. Despite the fact that the empire is no longer around, their story is still an important part of Ethiopian history. What are your thoughts on the history of the Ethiopian Empire? Let me know in the comments below. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please subscribe if you want to see more like it. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time.